Hello and welcome to another episode of From A to Zinc, the podcast bringing clarity to the supplement industry. Today, we're going to be busting the top 10 biggest supplement myths, and we'll be unpacking these myths through the lens of gut health, an area where my guest, Tim Spector, is widely recognized as the world's leading expert. So, Tim, thank you for joining me today, for taking the time and truly caring the way you do about changing the way people think about health and nutrition. I am super excited to have you here.
Me too. Should be fun.
So let's dive right in. The first one is green powders. Now, green powders are everywhere, and it is said that they are an essential supplement that is just as good as eating vegetables. And I ask you, do green powders really offer any benefit to your health, to your gut microbiome, or is there something else that we should be focusing on?
Well, I guess like everything in nutrition, it's compared to what? Compared to eating only a diet composed of McDonald's, does having some green powders in addition to that help you? Probably. If you said having green powders in addition to a healthy diet, I would say highly unlikely. We have to always ask this question. You can't just have a standalone set of green powders without some sort of context. So most of these green powders are complex mixtures of many different vitamins and nutrients all stuck together with hard to discern concentrations and amounts. So I think there's this big gap between adding lots of chemicals in a powder that sound good to the consumer because they've got everything I've ever heard of, must be good for you, and a total lack of clinical trials where they've put them against a placebo and studied large numbers of people to see how they get on with them. And the structure of them is also different. So the other part of your question was, if you compared it to having a range of plants in your diet, no contest, plants win every time because each plant has 100 different chemicals, hundreds of chemicals in it, up to 1,000 chemicals. And these green powders have basically taken one or two of those chemicals, extracted it, or they're made often from yeast, genetically modified yeast in giant factories. So just the sort of chemical bit of it is taken out. Whereas it could be that the important bits of the plant are actually not being represented in the green powder other than the green color. So no way would it ever beat a selection of plants because it has the structure, it has the natural fiber, etc., etc.
And especially that fiber, as you just mentioned, that is something that people should be focusing more on as it plays a vital role in promoting the health of your heart, your gut, and even your metabolism, as I read in some great articles on the Zoe website. Now, this brings me to the next myth, which is about gut health. It is said that taking probiotics will improve your gut health or even fix your microbiome. But what does the science say about probiotics and prebiotics?
So the probiotic literature has been going on for 50 odd years and it's quite hard to digest. But overall, there are significant numbers of randomized controlled trials that show there is some possible benefit there. And we shouldn't dismiss that. So for people with a condition, whether it's with colitis or irritable bowel syndrome, some people with mild depression, and a variety of other conditions, diarrhea and various childhood illnesses, getting over viruses and things, and after antibiotics, there is some evidence of their benefit. There's no evidence, as far as I know, of any probiotic that prevents illness. It doesn't seem to work, or the ones they've been using so far, at least, the caveat, don't have any protective long-term benefits. And probiotics have a fairly minor role because the amount of probiotic you're getting into your gut is tiny compared to the number of existing microbes there. They're swamped. So if they do have an effect, it's probably higher up in the gut in the small intestine, maybe a bit like an immune reaction rather than actually taking over. So this is why doing any claims that probiotics will prevent stuff works when they're given in this supplement form. It's a different story if you come to fermented foods, which contain live probiotics, where I think there's more evidence, but they're using, again, more diversity of species in there. You asked about prebiotics, and I'm a co-founder of this company called Zoe, this nutrition company that did a trial comparing a leading probiotic, Lactobacillus rhamnosus, which is very well known and been shown to work pretty well in mental health disease and a little bit in IBS as well. We compared that with the placebo of some breadcrumbs with our prebiotic supplement of 32 freeze-dried plants called Daily 30, which I think is available in the US and the UK now. There were nearly 400 people in the trial into these three groups. And the probiotic did have some benefit. It shifted about 4 of the top 100 microbes, but that was dwarfed by the effect of the prebiotic, which changed over 40 of them. We got real significant clinical improvements with the prebiotic, not only on the gut microbes, but also a whole range of symptoms from, energy, bloating, hunger, etc. So that changed my mind and made me think that actually prebiotics, which are like a fertilizer for the gut microbiome, are currently a more effective supplement than trying to target individual microbes with a probiotic in the way we're currently doing with supplements, which at most you might get 10 species together, I think, in probiotic supplements. Makes me think that we should be looking more at foods. I just done a study for a book I'm writing, and some of the fermented foods have up to 80 species in them.
Probiotic or prebiotic also?
These are fermented foods. So these are sometimes a mixture. So if you're talking about sauerkraut or kimchi, they are a prebiotic in that they've got the cabbage and the chili and the garlic, but they're also a probiotic because they've got live microbes on them. Some people call them symbiotics, potentially a new class that we ought to be thinking of. And the evidence is quite clear that you can improve inflammation with fermented foods. I think you were talking to Christopher Gardner earlier, who did one of these great studies, and that's changed the game really, saying that, many of these fermented foods, which are a mixture of pro and prebiotics, seem to have much more of an effect, things that we've never really shown as clearly with just probiotics alone. So I've switched from someone who was a big believer in probiotics to moving to either sort of more natural prebiotics where you've got a whole variety of fibers, not just one or two, but the full range, and maybe mixed with real foods like you get in kimchis and kefirs, etc., and sauerkrauts.
Do you have any other foods that you can eat that contain more prebiotics? Because actually, I think probiotics, they're everywhere. You hear foods like you said, kimchi, some dairy products, but prebiotic foods are not so well known. Is it because they don't actually come in food so much? They rather come purely in supplements? Or do you have some specific foods you eat?
Most plants that we eat are prebiotics, potentially. We can't call them prebiotics because we haven't shown that they have a health benefit. So it's all in how you describe it and in a way how the USDA has been set up to say what you can call a prebiotic food, because pre just means it's feeding something and biotic means it's healthy for life. And so you've got the pre bit, but generally foods haven't been proven or they're not allowed to be put in that category because they're foods. It's kind of interesting how supplements are a different group. You can't be a food and a supplement. And so we came into this problem when we were trying to categorize our Daily 30. Is it a food? Is it a supplement? What is it? In the end, in Europe, we couldn't call it a supplement because it contains cordyceps, the fungi that you get in Nepal, and that hasn't been classified as an edible mushroom yet in Europe. So for strange reasons, things get called different things.
You named it quite well. I think it was called whole food supplement. And I must say it stuck out because I've never read whole food supplement in any product before. So I thought that's actually very creative.
In a way, it came because of these legislations. We had to find some new term for it because it clearly isn't the same as a green powder supplement because generally we're using the whole plant. So I think we are going to see a whole new range of these types of foods, particularly mixing pro, symbiotics, and maybe even something called postbiotics, which are dead microbes, which is an interesting concept, but there's some evidence that dead microbes might actually be healthy for you as well. That's a space to watch. But I think, we're already seeing some of these green powders adding in probiotics because that's the only way they can show some effect. And I think the whole field will probably be moving towards doing things that do impact the gut microbes because those tests will become much more common and cheaper as well, so more accessible to everybody.
So if we wrap that point up about probiotics and prebiotics, what does actually support a good and healthy gut? If it's quite difficult with pro and prebiotics to judge the evidence right now.
In my cookbook and my other books, I've now got it down to 6 simple rules you can take away. So the first is to try and eat 30 different types of plant a week. That's a vegetable, a fruit, a nut, a seed, a herb, a spice. It's not as hard as it sounds. The second is to eat the rainbow, which I'm sure we've all heard before, but that's because polyphenols are the key chemicals that give it those colors and those bitter tastes. High polyphenol foods are crucial to that. Third would be to eat regular fermented foods, as we've discussed. We're talking more than just one portion a day, and it's trying to vary them so you get the full range of those microbes that I was talking about. You can get up to 80 in some types and only 3 in another. So you need to mix and match that. I'd say pivot your protein. So try and eat less meat. And in order to compensate for the protein, go for beans and lentils, legumes, because they are super healthy. They've got not only a lot of protein, but they've also got lots of fiber, which your microbes love. Then try and do time-restricted eating. The general idea, resting your gut overnight is a really good way to help. And finally, reduce high-risk processed foods. These are the ones that make up over half the US diet and about 65% in kids. So do those and your gut will definitely improve.
Now let's move to the next myth, number 3. It's about one of the most hyped products at the moment, which is creatine. Now, the opinions vary. Some say everyone should be taking it. Some say it's for people who work out. It is said to be one of the most studied, most effective, and most safe supplements out there. And I just want to know from a scientific point, are there really endless studies proving its safety and effectiveness?
I would say that there's reasonable studies. Everything's got to be taken relative to what? So relative to many other nutrients and supplements, it's been well studied. But this is a very poor area overall compared to general medicine and health and everything else, because there's little incentive for companies to actually do the studies, unlike in pharmaceuticals. But I think it is safe as far as I understand. So the studies have pretty much shown safety at most ages to take it, so that if you do take excess, it just gets leaked out of your system and doesn't hang around or cause any problems. So I don't think there's any danger in taking it. As to its benefits, they have shown benefits for people suffering low protein for some reason. We do know that 90% of Americans are getting enough protein, so it's only a minority that aren't. And in those cases, yes, this would be a useful addition. It might be useful for people who, say, vegetarian or vegan, who aren't getting much in the way of meat, and they are interested in working out or improving their muscle mass, or at least stopping it depleting. But probably for the average person who has a healthy diet, has meat several times a week, it's going to be a marginal benefit. Compared to other things you could do, I would say it's quite low on the list. It's not something that I wake up in the middle of the night worrying about. I think it's much more important to maintain good gut health for your overall health, for your immune system, for your brain, everything else. And I think most people are fine. But if you're worried, if you've decided to give up meat, if you're in a bodybuilding program, yeah, it's a reasonable thing to have. But don't spend all your money on it. Save some of your money for real food and plants. We don't spend enough on real food.
The next myth is about that timing doesn't matter. Some people say that you can take supplements whenever you want, in the morning, in the evening, before eating, after eating. But can timing generally impact how your body, your gut, or your metabolism responds to nutrients?
Yes is the answer. Do we know exactly how your body responds to all of these? No. We know most about the effectiveness of medicines. So if you call prescribed medicine supplements, then we do know quite a lot. In the last 5 years, we've changed our advice about taking anti-blood pressure medication. We know that it's much more effective when taken at night, whereas 5 years ago, people were told to take it in the morning. So you need lower doses, etc. And that's true for a lot of medicines. That might be a general state of your metabolism, means that you can break it down more and it gets absorbed easier while your body isn't busy doing other things. So in a way, that might be the reason. For most of these other supplements, I would say, given that we don't know if they work, it's very hard to know whether timing is going to have a big effect. Obviously, the less you take together, the less chance of interactions that would stop them having any effect whatsoever. But I don't think you should be waking up in the middle of the night to take supplements. You want to rest your gut and keep it happy. But I think increasingly fitting everything we do, we put into our mouth, into some form of circadian rhythm is important. And making sure your gut is rested at night is looking increasingly crucial. Your microbes need to sleep as much as we do. If you're taking one of those green powders with over 50 chemicals in it and artificial sweeteners, it would definitely, in my view, be a bad thing, yes. Because what you don't want to do is to wake up your gut microbes when they think they're asleep, and you've only got the cleaning team in there, and suddenly something that looks like food, even if it might be some maltodextrin to bind it together or some emulsifiers to make it stick together. All these things have to be dealt with by your gut microbes. So I think you've made a good point there. That would be a very good reason not to take this stuff at night, particularly as, the science is still out on whether they work or not. You don't want it to do any harm. I'd be against taking any ingredients that you get in processed food in a supplement anyway, at any time. But it's particularly bad, I would say, out of your normal eating windows when your body is actually, really pumped up to deal with it.
The next myth is about stacking. Some people, so that they don't forget taking them during the day, they take their supplements in the morning. And the question is that really good, or is stacking maybe even harmful? Can it disrupt your gut or your digestion?
Are you saying you're taking them all at once rather than
Yes.
throughout the day?
Take all your 10, 20, 30 supplements in the morning, be done with it, so you basically don't have to worry about it. That's what a lot of people do, so that they ensure they don't forget it later on. But that's a lot of supplements for the gut, right? So I wonder if it can be too aggressive, just mixing everything together.
Well, I don't know any science directly alluding to that, so I can only go on what I've learned or what I was taught at medical school. But it seems dangerous to take too much of things that you wouldn't find naturally. And the example I always give is I used to do osteoporosis clinics and menopause clinics and used to prescribe calcium all the time, particularly around the menopause, as the big theory was bones are made of calcium, therefore you give calcium, it's going to be good. And for about 50 years, it was the golden supplement, and it had all forms. And generally people did take it in one amount, usually in the morning with breakfast. And studies have now shown that not only does it not work to prevent fractures, that it has been associated in 5 trials with increased risk of heart disease. So you've got to start thinking, well, is there anything wrong with calcium? No, I mean, calcium is in every cell in our body. It's crucial for maintaining our cell walls and all kinds of metabolic process, and it's important for our bones. But we have a tightly regulated system. It keeps our blood calcium really precise. So clearly, we're not able to deal with all this calcium. And when you're having a gram of calcium shot in the morning, your body couldn't cope with it. So it has this excess it has to get rid of. It looks like a lot of this was ending up in your arteries or places it shouldn't go. And that's the current theory about why you increased your risk of heart disease by 20 or 30% systematically, because it was hardening your arteries. So in a way, dumping lots of excess minerals and nutrients into your body in ways that your body hasn't evolved to deal with it could end up with consequences like we saw with calcium. So I think it is dangerous. And I think calcium is fine and it's in food because your body slowly absorbs it. You can get calcium out of Italian mineral water, but that's very slowly absorbed. It's not like taking it in this big slab of chemicals. So if we extrapolate from that, then it makes sense that there's a potential downside to doing this, although I can see why people want to get it out of the way in the morning, otherwise they'll forget. But it's not in the form that the body's expecting it. I think there is this problem about taking the healthy component of a food and assuming it's going to be exactly the same in the body when we haven't evolved to treat it the same way. So definitely excess can be a problem, and I think this is what people should be aware of. You can definitely have too much of a good thing.
Now, let's move on to something that I find very interesting because there are many different forms of supplements. And the next myth is about a product that has become very trendy in the last years, which are gummies, supplement gummies. And the myth is that gummies are just as effective as capsules or powder. Now, I've seen a lot of gummies, and most of them do have forms of sweeteners or coloring, flavoring, and so it makes them something that you would say ultra-processed food, I assume. And I wonder if you have an ultra-processed delivery system, like a gummy, for example, does that impact your gut health differently than taking it in a whole food or another capsule form?
The only difference between them is that the gummy, say, has an artificial sweetener in it, and the other one, the same dose, and there's nothing in the other one, then the artificial sweetener gummy is going to have some harmful effects on your gut microbiome. We know all the ones tested so far have some adverse effect on the gut microbiome. It includes things like stevia, which are perceived as the more natural ones because it exists on the leaf of a tree in Brazil. There are differences between them, so there are certainly some artificial sweeteners that are worse than others and that can actually trigger metabolic spikes as well. So having lots of gummies in order to be healthy, you could be counteracting any potential health benefit by messing up your gut microbes. That then they've done studies show that if you have a lot of artificial sweeteners, things like aspartame or ACE-K, you can trigger diabetes in mice from your microbes when they're passed them on. And you can actually get really disruptive metabolic signals from them. So gummies every now and again is probably fine. But if you're taking them on a daily basis for years, then I certainly would go for one that doesn't have that artificial sweetener in it, or avoid gummies completely if you can.
Especially also because it's not like a treat, right? It's not like having a chocolate now and then or a gummy bear, but people buy these products specifically to do something for their bodies, right? For a health purpose. And that is where you need to consider that maybe then it's not the healthiest option.
It can be very hard to see as well. So sometimes you may want to be in a store and you've got all these signs. You always got to look at the back of the packet rather than the front, because you'll never learn anything meaningful from the front. And if it's in tiny font, so you may want to use an app or something to give you the risk score. Zoe now has a free one called the Zoe Health app, which you can download in the US. You can scan any barcode and it will tell you what the risk to your health of those particular additives or chemicals are. Because they're not all bad, but in general, yeah, avoid gummies. You're right.
I think that is such a relevant product because especially when it comes to additives, we know when we see a word like sugar on the back of it, but with all the additives, the average consumer just doesn't understand what is what anymore. And I think having something that can show you good, bad, what is the risk is an absolutely fantastic product. So I hope that will be released soon in Europe. Let's get to the next myth. It is about protein shakes and protein bars. A lot of people still believe that having a protein bar or having a protein shake is a healthy snack for you, for your body. But my question is, are those basically also just ultra-processed products in disguise? Are they a good snack or not?
High in protein is the new health halo.
What does that mean?
That means that it's disguising an unhealthy product with a health claim in the same way that we used to say low fat or low calorie. The new kid on the block is called high in protein, and it works. Consumers believe it. We did a survey, and I think 60% of people who saw a snack saying high protein said that's going to be good for me, regardless of whatever else is in it. Unfortunately, the vast majority, there might be a few exceptions, are terrible for you. They've got a huge list of ingredients, whether it's to make it low fat, high protein, they've had to stuff it with lots of starchy sugars, artificial sweeteners we've discussed. They've often got emulsifiers to bind in all this whey protein and soy protein with the other stuff to make it semi-palatable. May have sugar and salt added to it to make it hyper-palatable. I really would not be eating those. Eat real food instead. There's plenty of high-protein plants that are much better for you.
What do you like to eat as a healthy snack, if you snack?
I'm a nut fan, so bag of mixed nuts. I always try and have some nuts in my bag at all times. It is pretty universal and, gives you the protein, fiber, and fills you up. So a lot of these protein bars, they're not designed to fill you up because the manufacturers want you to eat two of them. So obviously they make them delicious and they add, that right amount of fat and sugar and salt to make it irresistible. But do resist it. And again, this is where the app will come in handy using the barcode. There might be a protein snack that isn't as bad as the others, and you can try that one.
But it's interesting. I actually just realized when you said that they have this perfect sweet spot of sweet and salty. It is true. When you look at most of the protein bars, they're actually either like salted caramel or cookies and cream, super sweet and super salty in a weird way that makes you want to have more. So thank you for that. Let's move on to our next myth, which is about one of the most popular supplement products, magnesium. Now, the myth is that one magnesium type is better than the other. Are there really different types of magnesium? There's so much confusion. Are some types of magnesium better than the others? What does the research and the science say today?
Well, at a macro level, I can say that magnesium supplements have not been shown to work for most of the conditions they've done trials in. We know magnesium is very important for the body. It's a key element in many aspects of our health, but most people are not magnesium deficient. We get magnesium in nearly all the plants we tend to eat. So it's very hard to find anyone with a magnesium deficiency. So what we're talking about is, does topping up your normal magnesium level improve your health? And for a long time, every time there's any sort of condition that has been hard to treat, they've tried things like magnesium or zinc in it. There is some evidence that it might help some infections and immune disease by a small amount. That's all really I know, but it's pretty incremental. It's not saying not a massive effect. So when it comes to saying, well, which magnesium works best, but there haven't been enough big trials to compare them. And we don't really know how much it really impacts the average person. Clearly, if you have a magnesium deficiency, it's going to be effective. And that's where most of the studies were done 50 years ago to show that, how important it is for your brain, for your health, the other ones, and people who are suffering nutritional deficiencies and so had magnesium deficiencies.
And that's really interesting to also think about that these were studies done on people with real deficiencies. I think a lot of people are not aware of that because nowadays you feel like magnesium, you should take it to sleep better, you should take it after sports, you should take it against anxiety. There's so much noise about it, but it's interesting to hear that the science and the data is actually not that strong on it.
Absolutely, yes. So it hasn't been definitively said it's of no value, but the studies I've seen have either been negative or they've only shown a very minor benefit of taking it. So far, no harm. I have not seen anything harmful, which is good news because, that's not always the case. I've been interested in mental health and I haven't seen strong evidence that it is beneficial for people who are on a normal diet. Again, the context is really important.
This is the almost last question. This is our 9th myth, and it is about glucose spikes. Now, there's a lot of talk about glucose, and of course, you at Zoe have also done a lot of research regarding glucose spikes. And the question is that blood sugar spikes are the enemy. And supplements like berberine or taking vinegar-based products before you eat are the cure. What does science say about glucose spikes and the gut connection to health and about having certain supplements before eating to avoid them? Is that really the key?
Well, the data is clearer on having regular glucose spikes is not good for you. Exactly how bad it is for you is still unclear because no one's done the really long-term experiments, because we only really started thinking about this about 10 years ago. They've done some nice genetic studies that suggest that people who have regular glucose spikes are more likely to get heart disease and diabetes. So most people accept there is that risk. Short-term studies show that people having high spikes and dips, as we've done at Zoe, show it can cause brain fog and lack of concentration and mental symptoms of tiredness and exhaustion, etc. So I think it's reasonable good evidence that we should be trying reducing sugar spikes. Maybe not in kids, but certainly in adults. The studies that have done reducing sugar spikes, things like with vinegar, have shown some benefits. You can reduce sugar spikes by about 30% with these products, which do seem to have some short-term benefits. That's true. We think at Zoe that sugar spikes are just one part of the whole holistic view of our nutritional health. So we think reducing fat spikes as well is important, reducing inflammation is important, and having good gut health is important. So we see it as just one part of it. I'm not against having a vinegary salad to start a meal. I think that's a good idea. But to think that taking a pill that would sort out all your problems distracts away from having a healthy, balanced diet, which is good for your gut health, good for your fats, and good for your sugar. So I'd rather people picked better foods than unhealthy foods and popped a tablet, although those tablets at least might work short term. Long term, might be worse off. So it's a nuanced answer. I'm not saying that you can't reduce some sugar spikes with berberine or with some other product or the vinegars, but choose something that doesn't spike your glucose instead. There's plenty of other things, or increase your fiber content so it doesn't matter.
So that's kind of like a distraction from the problem in a way. You're just treating the consequence of eating a high carb meal rather than basically treating what you should actually be changing, maybe having a salad or a healthier meal.
I think it's great that people have, drawn attention to this. Before, people didn't worry about eating a croissant or bread, or didn't realize, why they felt unwell 3 hours later. So I think it's absolutely great, but I don't think we should be just popping pills rather than changing our diets.
You just mentioned one thing that I heard for the first time. So you were talking about the spikes that you have from eating carbs, so the glucose spikes, but you mentioned a fat spike. I have never heard of that. Can you explain, when does one get a fat spike? Because, for example, I love to eat one avocado, chop it into two with some olive oil on top. Does that mean I will get a fat spike?
Great question. Well, we looked in the Predict studies, as well as in the sugar and the glucose monitoring, we gave people a fatty meal and measured their blood at 0, 3, and 6 hours afterwards. Most people have cleared the fat, the triglycerides in their blood by 6 hours. So it's normal to have a fat spike after a meal, but it also should drop quite quickly and get absorbed by the liver, so it's not hanging around. If you've got fat hanging around in your blood vessels, that causes inflammation, and that leads to all kinds of problems, mental and physical, metabolic, etc. So you don't want the fat hanging around because it causes inflammation. We know that healthy fats are less likely to do that and less likely to cause inflammation. So you will get a fat spike at 3 hours, but hopefully if you've got the right fats and the right metabolism, you will be able to get that down so it's disappeared. You can't measure it at 6 hours. So that's why we think extra virgin olive oil, avocados, things that have a high ratio of good fats to bad fats are going to be fine. Most people can have unlimited amounts of them. It's the bad fats you don't want. Too much pure saturated fats or some of these artificial fats that you'd get in things like palm oils and other things, that they're the problematic ones that you often get in these highly processed foods.
That's really interesting. So I guess that's also more about the quality of the fat. So I think I'm safe with my avocado, hopefully. I must say I did add the daily 30 on top to give it some crunch. So I guess I also had a bit of fiber.
Yeah, well, interestingly, we haven't tested daily 30 in the spikes, but generally we get better blood results and better blood fat results in our trial of the daily 30. So in general, if you can boost your fiber levels, you will have less sugar and fat spikes anyway.
Interesting. Now we're moving on to our last myth, which is about a personalized approach. I've heard you talk a lot about personalized nutrition. I want to know, what do you think about personalized supplements? Do you think personalized nutrition is something that will also translate into supplements? Is that the future of nutrition and supplements? Or do you think those are two different shoes?
I think they're on the same spectrum. And I think you can't really talk about nutrition without talking about supplements. And it also depends how you define a supplement, which, as we've discussed, a whole food supplement is a whole new way of thinking about things. And if you include probiotics and prebiotics as supplements, definitely, as the microbiome field evolves and we get more and more data on millions of people, it should become routine to get an assessment of your gut health and then be told, A, what foods you should eat. And as an alternative, you say, well, if you can't eat those foods, have this particular supplement, because we know that most people are unique in their gut microbiome. So unlike our genes, which we're 99% similar on, we only share about 20%, 15% of our microbes. So for that reason, I think we're going to see more and more personalization. And it certainly makes sense for probiotics, because often the reason they fail is you're just putting a few species into our guts. And if they had the same probiotic and you and I took it, chances are quite slim that it's going to work the same way in both of us. Why would that, say, 3 species work against our 2,000 that are completely different? I think that makes sense. And similarly for fibers, there are about 80 artificial fibers you can manufacture now. At the moment, we don't know which ones work best in people, which ones might cause more bloating, etc. But I see that as a future area. Even for our daily 30, the prebiotic fiber, we might end up personalizing that to some extent, at least into, say, 4 types, where we could emphasize certain types of plants, the mushrooms to boost fungi or whatever else it happens to be in the future. Obviously, there's already companies out there trying to sell personalized traditional supplements like your vitamin K levels or your B6 or whatever based on blood tests. But again, that's more based on marketing than science because no one's done the studies to show that you'd actually benefit from it. So hopefully in the microbiome personalized space, we'll be backing it up with proper studies all the time to make sure that people would benefit from that approach.
What tests do you take to understand what bacteria or what microbes you have in your gut?
Well, you do a microbiome stool test. You've got to collect a bit of your poop at home and you put it into a little tube which has some liquid preservative in it and you stick it in the mail to the lab. And they used genetic methods to diagnose it. So it should be called genome-wide sequencing, where they use shotgun sequencing, where you look at every gene and every microbe that they find. So they break open it, you just get the genes, separate the smelly stuff, you've only got the DNA, and then they will tell you every species you've got. Some other companies do it cheaper with a version that's called 16S, where they only look at one gene. But the good companies like Zoe and a few others will give you the full sequencing, which allows you then to look at every species and every strain that you've got. From that complexity, we've worked out what the 100 good and 100 bad ones are that everyone has. So we would give you a ratio and say, okay, you've got 80% of the good ones, 10% of the bad ones, and you want to work on getting towards 100 and 0 in those 2 groups by changing your diet. That's essentially what we're doing now, and that works across countries, across vegans, vegetarians, all kinds of nationalities and food cultures, etc. So, and that's just the start. I think we're going to get much better telling people, are you at risk of eating meat? What's your inflammation level based on these microbes that you've got? We can already tell whether you drink coffee or not, interestingly, from your microbes. Yes, there's a specific microbe that only eats coffee. I mean, the science is overwhelming for roasted coffee, that it's healthy for your heart. It's nearly as good for green tea and therefore matcha, because the fermentation actually increases the polyphenols. As generally, fermentation adds more goodness to it.
Is roasted coffee fermented?
Before they roast it, all coffee, as it comes off, they break it open and they leave it for a few days on the floor of the plantation in the moist air in Africa.
One question I still had you said you do the test at Zoe and you can see the good and the bad bacteria, basically. I have a question because one thing that is also very popular nowadays is these parasite cleanses. Everyone says you should test for parasites and you should cleanse them. Now, is that really the truth, or are some parasites maybe beneficial in a way?
Well, I think probably many parasites are beneficial. We're only just finding out. We detected a parasite in about 20% of British people and 10% of Americans called blastocystis. If you look this up in Wikipedia, you would say, okay, this is a cause of traveling illness and other things. You don't want it. But we found that we looked at about 100,000 people across the world and found that people with blastocystis were healthier universally. They had less heart disease, cancer, they were slimmer, less diabetes, their blood pressure was lower, blood lipids were lower, and all our ancestors had it. And we think that it has a particular effect on lowering fat levels in the blood. So it probably eats microbes that cause fat to go up. So by keeping that group down, it could control the fat levels. So I think that's a great lesson, that we don't know enough and we shouldn't be randomly just killing off bugs inside our gut that we don't know enough about and could be really helpful for us. And so we make ourselves worse. Anyway, that's what we did with antibiotics, and that's why we've only got half the number of microbes that our African ancestors have. And so This old idea that all bugs are bad, kill 99.9% of all germs, is totally the wrong approach. So there are other ones that have found the various worms, intestinal worms, that are really good in fighting allergy. And so if you've got them, you just don't get allergic diseases and things. So I would advise anybody, unless they've got symptoms and they're bleeding from their gut or having diarrhea, don't try and remove them without really good reason.
That is so interesting because even on social media, so many people without medical background, scientific background are swearing on doing some cleanses, and I guess you just don't know what you're really doing. Like you say, there's so much research still to be done.
In a way, you don't really change your gut microbiome with a cleanse. They hang on in there and they find some crevice to hide and they come out again. So I'm perhaps more worried about things like antibiotics and strong anti-parasite medication. Some people never, some people can quite easily. It's quite personalized. It's hard to quantify that, but there seem to be about 1/3 will bounce back within a few weeks, 1/3 a few months, 1/3 can take years.
Wow, super interesting. I have one last question, which I ask every guest. If you could give one advice when it comes to supplements and gut health, whether it's about choosing them, using them, or avoiding mistakes, what would it be?
Well, in general, only use the supplement if you can see they've done a proper clinical trial on it. Some of the companies have done this and they've spent a lot of money. And so we really should be supporting those companies that do the science. That's the first thing. And there are some probiotics out there that have done randomized trials. Just make sure that you fit into the criteria of what they've tested it for. But increasingly, if you're looking for your gut, try and make your dietary changes first. They're the long-standing ones that are really important for the rest of your life. And at the moment, I would go for a prebiotic that is something like the Daily 30 to add to your food rather than replacing food, because I think that's the other point is a lot of supplementation is instead of having to find healthy food. But I think if you can combine healthy food with the supplement, then you're much better off. There are a lot of products out there that may not be very good for you at all, and you'll be wasting your money.
Super, thank you so much. And honestly, my full respect to your entire work. Also, you're one of the ones in this community that really is so out there. You make so much videos, content with everybody, with different kind of people. You're really in the community and I really, really appreciate it. And also this product, Daily 30, I know it's developed with scientists and nutritionists, but especially when it comes to seeds, I always mix my 5 seeds in the smoothie, but getting 30 in its natural form, that actually tastes very good. I tried it out now, put it on my soup, on my salad, and today on my avocado, and I love that there's some thyme and cumin. I think it's a really fantastic product.
Great. Okay.
Thank you so much for the time.